Good morning. My name is Eric Kissauer, and I'm filling in a little bit for Mike Meredith, who is away on business, but may be joining us in just a little bit. I want to welcome you to our June DBIA Owners Council webinar series. And we have a really great speaker to be with us today. Mike Courtney he's the Director of Facilities for the Judicial Council of California. So let's move on. There's my slide. So I do leadership and development coaching, and really enjoying that after 40 years in the business. Let's see, the DBIA mission is to promote the value of design, build, and project delivery. So, and our vision is to be the preeminent resource for leadership education, objective expertise, and best practices for the successful integrated delivery of projects. So IPD and design build are not mutually exclusive. Next. Some DBIA information and training that we have coming up. So some of this, as you see, is free to DBIA members, this design build manual of practice. And then the design build professional certification is recognized as a standard of experience and knowledge in design build. There's online learning and then educational courses that you'll see advertised if you're on the DBIA mailing list, or you can go to the website. Being a fully volunteer organization, we're always looking for volunteers, regardless of where you happen to be within the region. So these are the different committees that we have. Relative to the Owners Council, however, we do want you to be either a city public agency or a private project owner to be part of the Owners Council, because this is what we're calling a safe zone for owners to be able to talk back and forth peer-to-peer and be able to get best advice on best practices and design build done right. Some Owners Council information, the public agency education training scholarships that are available. You go to this website that's listed there and see if that fits your fancy. We have a couple of owners hotlines. There's one that's the national one, which is the one that's owner hotline at dbia.org. And for more local advice, we have 3 contacts within California that will potentially respond, and that's going to the www.dbia-WPR.org site /owners. So that gives you a pull-down menu for that hotline. The other side benefit to being a DBIA member and an owner is that you can post your project announcements on the Owners Council page as well. Here are a couple of things that are coming up. Next month, we've moved up our BIM and Lean in design build. We were going to do it in August, but we've switched that topic. We've moved July's topic back to August, Lean and how to maximize your design build project. Then in September, we've got specialty and trade partners, a discussion around selecting those folks and treating them fairly in the process. And then we're still working on a topic for October. Some other save the date information that's coming up. Like I mentioned, we have some courses, this design management fundamentals. For those of you in Hawaii, we have the Owners Council series number 6 that I just talked about. There's a breakfast program coming up on August 6th in LA. Another Owners Council webinar that I talked about in August. There's a lunch program coming up in Sacramento on August 15th. August 16th, we have another one of the classes offered by DBIA, and that's BIM Execution Planning for design build. And then finally, if you happen to be in Hawaii, there's a golf tournament at the end of August. Here's our board of directors. We've got approximately 30 board members, a very active board, and they represent all of our chapters, whether it be Arizona, Hawaii, California, Nevada. And there's our website. So we're encourage you to look at that. We can check out events, our schedule, and different things going on within the region. So we're looking at this as Design Build 101. This is a year-long series of webinars, and we've got industry experts from around the region that are talking about design build done right, and most of the information you can find in the DBIA Manual of Practice, which is free to owners, free to members. The topics we're hoping are directly relevant to owners and purchase of design build services. Each topic is a standalone presentation, so there's no prerequisites within the webinar series. And we welcome any input that you may have into topics that you would like to hear about in the future. So you can see we did topics in February, March, April, May. You see what we have listed there. Had very good attendance on these, and we're looking to continue this now, as I talked about earlier. So Mike Courtney is our featured speaker, and Mike has more than 35 years of experience in private and public sector work. During this time, he has developed and built a wide variety of facilities. He's managed and overseen all phases of project delivery, including budgeting, entitlements, pre-construction, design, construction administration, real estate development, financing, and building operations. His past experience includes more than 4 million square feet of office buildings, public safety facilities, K-12 schools, research facilities, courthouses, correctional facilities, and a minor league ballpark, plus a 10,000-seat indoor arena that included hotels and industrial projects as well. From '97 to 2001, Mike served as the governor's appointee for the state of California's real estate building program. While with the state, Mike played a key role in the development of the state's real estate policy and design build procurement laws, procurement process, and contracts. Mike's familiar with all forms of project delivery, and as a result of directly managing projects or representing an owner in the areas of procurement, selection, contract negotiations, project procedures, and project execution. In June 2016, Mike was appointed to lead the Judicial Council of California's Facility Services Office, which oversees all real estate, maintenance, design, and construction services for more than 470 facilities throughout California. Mike is certified by the Design Build Institute of America and by the Construction Management Association of America for his expertise. With that, I want to welcome Michael Courtney.
Thanks, Eric. Good afternoon, everybody. Before we get into the presentation, I just wanted to try to give everyone a view of my perspective. I spent a number of years in the private sector working for private owners, development companies, and our perspective is as much from an investment and a financial side as it was from an owner who's managing buildings for tenants. So we use negotiated selection and procurements all the time. It's a little different in the government, in public sector, because you have statutes and regulations that guide procurements and guide selection. But I hope today I can show you that it's possible to do negotiated selection on either side of the business. So negotiation or negotiated contracts is really just the actor process of producing an agreement on how you're going to do something. I don't have
a presentation, Mike.
I apologize. You guys can't see my screen, Eric?
No, we can see it, but I think you want to be in a different mode with this on the slideshow for the
Oh,
presenter presentation.
is
There.
that better?
No. So I think if you go up to slideshow,
We'll try this again.
presenter mode.
Oh, what did I do? No, that's not it. I apologize. How's that?
There you go.
Okay, I apologize. So today I want to talk about DBI's best practices, give you an overview of negotiated selection, talk about progressive design build a little bit and how it fits into this, talk about contract terms and issues, contract types, and then finally provide you examples of public and private projects and try to contrast how the procurements and the negotiated selection might differ. So as Eric said at the beginning of the presentation today, we're trying to incorporate all of DBIA's best practices into everything we do. So whether that's through design build done right, the DBIA best practices information that you can all get to on the DBIA website, various DBIA position statements, the actual manual practice today. I used for the manual practice the negotiated selection and the progressive design build documents. And in my presentation, you'll see references to those documents on points that I'm trying to make as I go through the discussion. So whether you're doing, well, for any procurement really, but especially with a negotiated selection, you start with what is your strategic plan, what are you trying to achieve? What's the business need for your project? The definition of the project, your choice of project delivery, because the project delivery method you use really dictates the type of information you have to develop to go through the delivery. If you're going to go through, the selection of a design builder, then, obviously you've got how do you get to a short list, how are you going to do your interview and evaluation, and finally, what does your actual selection process look like? So a very important part of this is the project definition phase. And I would always recommend that you have some sort of program and some level of design guidelines developed. Now that can develop, or it can vary tremendously depending on the type of project. And again, what your procurement looks like. And a lot of times you sort of have to work backwards from how you're actually making your selection that will guide you in what your the information you're developing. But one of the most important things is for any owner, public or private, is your budget. And to me, if you have to create enough information so that you can accurately define a budget for whatever it is you're trying to build. And then finally, what does your procurement process look like? So all these things are really important before the owner actually begins moving into the actual procurement. We'll talk later on about some examples of projects that I did early in my career when I was with the state the first time, where we didn't necessarily do a real good job at that, and we had to catch up later during the project. And then You know, what does the design build award phase look like, or your actual procurement? Typically, you're going to see two-phase contracts or two-phase procurements where there's a pre-construction phase and then there's a GMP or construction phase. This is pretty common in negotiated selections. And again, it's that. And then the other one that's really important to think about and understand is you're trying to get to that guaranteed maximum price. There's always a relationship between that early GMP and the level of definition. And that's also a risk issue for any owner, again, public or private. Oftentimes on the private side, you know, that's all about financing. If you're doing the type of project where there's economics involved, say it's you're building an office building for somebody and they're leasing it, and so you have a rent pro forma. So you're trying to fit your project inside your rent pro forma and also make sure as that owner that you're getting a rate of return on that project that you're looking for. So progressive design build. These are some of the points about progressive design build that tie directly into negotiated selection. You want to get that design builder in early. It's usually a qualification-based selection process, or at least that's what DBIA would recommend. But you can use fees, the design builder's fee, and even their general conditions as part of the selection process. It's very common in the private sector. Some of the examples I'll talk about all have that as a key requirement. And then again, that project definition component, the level that you develop it, or you're going to develop it jointly with the design builder. In essence, your GMP or your price for the project, your pro forma, dictates the level of your definition. These are almost always two-phase contracts. Again, there's this pre-design or pre-construction phase, and then the second part is the construction with price guarantee phase. So types of contracts. For design build, DBI has model contracts. I used those model contracts when I was in the private sector. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the discussion.
I'm sorry, Mike, excuse me. Can you hit the display settings up on top to expand the screen?
Sure.
No.
How's that? That work?
There you go. There, yes,
okay.
Thank you.
So design build finance, very common in the private sector. Although large public agencies use this a lot, it's disguised under a lease or a lease purchase. And then design build finance operate. Again, pretty common in the private sector where the lease includes maintenance responsibilities, or public-private partnerships, which we're seeing a lot today across the US, both in infrastructure, horizontal projects, as well as building projects. And I'm going to talk about a specific public-private partnership the Judicial Council did later on. So contract terms and other issues to think about. Again, depending on how you select your design build team, you may not need a stipend. If you're hiring the design build team purely on quals and maybe some fees, and the design build team is not having to produce a lot of information to be selected, then you may want to consider not having a stipend at all. A savings clause. Can you have that in the contract? This helps promote, obviously, everybody working together because everybody's motivated to share in any cost savings you can develop. However, many public contracts don't allow this. Other performance incentives, shared project cost savings, early completion bonuses, common again in the private sector, less common in public contracts. However, Caltrans does allow for early completion bonuses. We all heard about this a lot when we had bridge projects go out here, either due to earthquakes or some other disaster. And I've not seen it on the building side in the public sector, but it is in Caltrans statutory authority. Very important to define the pre-construction phase of anything you're doing. What does that phase look like? What are the goals you're trying to achieve? And additionally, what does the construction or the GMP phase look like? Again, it's important to think through these things and define them as part of your whole selection process and the negotiation you would take on with the firm or the team you select. Termination for failure to reach a GMP. So in two-step contracts, if you get through that pre-design phase and you can't get to a budget, do you have a way to, for the contractor to get out of the project? Do you have a process in place to bring somebody else in? It's a pretty difficult situation it would put an owner in, but it's something you should think about. What do you do? The CSU system has had this issue occur to them. We use CMAA risk here at the Judicial Council, and we've had that issue happen on us where we hire the contractor in a pre-construction phase and we can't get to a GMP. We're forced to terminate and select somebody else. Selection of subcontractors, another very important thing as you think through a negotiated selection. Subs who perform design, does that matter to them? I would certainly recommend that in any design build project that all the MEP subs, curtain wall, precast, that the design come from those subcontractors, the detailed design. They're the ones who know best. In a lot of public sector procurements today, especially I know at the state level, the key subcontractors a design builder brings to the table during the procurement are critical to the selection process. It's part of their evaluation. Can you allow, as an owner, design builder self-performance? Something I would highly recommend. The design build team has more skin in the game if they're doing some of the work. It also allows them often to control the schedule better. Early work packages. I think if for no other reason than inflationary times like we have today, the earlier you can start the work, you can help beat inflation on a project and control the budget better. A lot of times early work is done. We have some sort of site restricted deadline you have to meet. We had recently here at the Judicial Council, we had a building code change coming up, and we needed to demonstrate to the state fire marshal that we could get a project in the ground. So we created early work packages to get our construction started. We did take the risk, though, that the following, one of the risks there is how do you structure that GMP? If the early work bids over budget, how are you going to deal with that cost overrun? So another important thing to think about. So let's talk about private sector. And a lot of this is directly from my experience and other people I know working in the private sector today. They always shortlist teams, or they handpick the teams based on working relationships and past experience. So in the tech industry, the owner is going to want to know that the companies working on their projects have that direct experience and they have a relationship with them. It's typical, the proposal that you would receive from those teams is what their team looks like, who their people are. Is the AE coming from the contractor, or will it be assigned by the owner? Not unusual to see in the private sector. It's not unusual for a schedule to be provided by the proposing team and then their fees and general conditions. My experience has been that the selection is always the team and the price. It's just because, again, there is a pro forma that people are trying to get to, either a financial pro forma or in the case of the tech industry, it's often a manufacturing pro forma. They've got to get a product to market. When I was working for the development company I worked for, we routinely did early completion bonuses. It helped us. When it got the landlord in sooner, we could collect rent sooner, right? So we were after that schedule from the builder. How fast can you get this project done? Also, the sooner we could convert from construction financing to permanent financing would be the sooner that we could avoid that risk of the construction financing, and sooner we could look at flipping a building out and moving on to the next project. The contracts always, negotiated from an industry standard or owner's template. I've done both. Owner's templates tend to be pretty rigid, and it's sort of a take it or leave it thing. The DBIA template is a good template to have, but it's not very detailed, and you end up customizing it a lot to get the owner's specific needs in. My experience, again, in the private sector is there's almost always, the earlier that GMP can come in for price, the better it is for that owner. So I want to talk about an example here, which is sort of a quasi public-private example. So this was actually before the school district design build statute came out, but it's very unique. So we were the private developer. We were actually hired by a home builder to build a school in a school district that was expanding. And in this case, the home builder had an agreement with the district that they would provide the school. It happened to be a middle school. So we get brought in. There was actually an agreement between the district and the home builders who would be hired. I was brought in. One of the reasons we wanted is I had just come off of working 17 years for the state. I understood the state's processes and all the rules that had to be followed to get a school built. So we went out and got proposals from 2 design build teams, teams qualifications, building schools, obviously, who their people were, that previous experience. And we wanted a fixed price for design, general conditions, and fee. The winning team had the best quals with the lowest overall price proposal. We got a GMP because the trick we had here is the home builder had a pro forma. They were trying to fit a budget for this school inside of their overall pricing for the homes. So they wanted from us some guarantee that the GMP would fit. Ultimately, the money that it was complicated because ultimately the money the district got from the state also played into it. So we got a GMP as early as we could in construction. We actually took the risk. We did this GMP at design development for a school. We took the risk for the DSA, the Division of the State Architects plan check. And the way we did is we had an agreement with the design build team who was building the school for us. And we had an agreement with the home builder in the district that if there was some, significant change that they would impose upon us, that we would, we would get extra funding for that. As it was, we had minimal structural changes and we were able to pull the project off. Very creative situation, very unusual, but these sorts of things happen more than you think out there in the private sector. It would be unusual for a school district to try to do this themselves because there's just so many twists and turns in this thing. And we financed part of this project for the district and the home builder as well. So let's talk about the public sector. So, can public sector engage in negotiated design build? Well, the answer is sort of. So in the statutes, pre-qualification is a defined process. So most state and local agencies, including counties, cities, and school districts, are bound by their statutory pre-qualification regulations. Price is part of the selection process. How much price is part of that process varies, and depending on how creative you can get, that price could be just GC's fee and design, and then you would set as the owner a budget for the direct cost or the construction cost. The state, the local agency, and the education code in California permit limited negotiations. And we're actually going to look at that language here in just a second. And then charter cities and other local agencies in California have the ability to make their own statutes for this. And so they can get more creative. And the San Francisco Airport Authority is in California as an example of that. They have a whole design build program there that's sort of, I think I would describe it as an owner's dream on how to do design build and how they select their design build teams and how, and if you've ever seen a presentation by folks from the Airport Authority, it's something to marvel at. So here's the language that's in the state and local agency code. So let's look at it for a second. So it says when you're going to use a best value selection, that the agency can hold discussions and negotiations with the responsive proposers, provided that they advertise in their procurement that they intend to do this and that they are going to hold those discussions in good faith. The education code for schools also has something similar in it. It's actually a pretty broad set of language if you really sit down and think about what you can do with this. So let's talk about a little bit more about what that might look like. In the RFP stage, there would be confidential meetings. As long as you publish the purpose, the scope of the meetings, and what you're going to discuss, you can hold these meetings. I've got direct experience doing this on state projects. I believe, as an example, the Department of General Services is actually doing it right now. In another part of my past career, we did it when I was at the department, working for the Department of Corrections as a consultant there. And then post-award, there's the whole issue about scope confirmation and contract language. It's often today in these complex projects that you're going to be modifying contract language afterwards and going back and forth verifying scope. Is your design build team a single entity? Is it a joint venture? How do the insurance requirements fit into the project? If you have an OSIP on your project, all technical things that need to get refined with the team that you're selecting. It's very tough on these large projects to take a standard contract and then you get a proposal from somebody that might have some qualifications in it, or it's something that you want to tweak a little bit to make it work for you and you're trying to fit it into a standard contract. I would advise that you figure out how to modify the language. However, you always need to consult your legal counsel. It's often in government that this makes attorneys very nervous, and it's not unusual because the public agencies are typically they're very conservative and risk adverse, that they wouldn't want to engage in this kind of process. But it can work, and I would recommend it. So here's an example of, we're switching here at the Judicial Council from CMAA risk to design build in the future. We actually have had design build authority for some time. It just has been used here hardly at all. But our process will look like this. It will have it's a two-step process. There'll be a pre-qualification phase. We will have some mandatory requirements, which our statute lays out, but then we'll be looking at the experience of the firm and their key people. We will shortlist, and as part of that shortlist, we'll get into we'll get a proposal from the shortlisted teams. There'll be an interview, which we will evaluate, generating points. We will ask for fees and general conditions, and that will be the price component. And then we're going to take the price and divide it by the points. And that's the formula for award. So it's, in our case, quality points per dollar. This is a process we've used on our CM at risk for some time. It's a little bit different than a lot of public agencies would typically say that price is some percentage of the selection. This is an act. Now that I've used this process, I like it, and it's proven for us to be a pretty competitive way to get quality teams and get a fair price for something. And then we'll determine, there'll be contract negotiations off of our template. We allow people who, or firms who propose on our projects to identify contract language at the time of proposal that they would like us to reconsider, and we will work with them on that. And then we will have a GMP in the future for the construction to be determined. I would like, just one other point here. For me, there is merit always from an owner, whether it's your private or public owner, again, to getting that GMP determined as soon as possible. For your budgeting purposes, make sure you're within the authorized budget of a project. And I always find that once you set that GMP and everybody knows it's coming, people get very motivated to answer questions and make decisions and not push that stuff off later for something to do at the 90% working drawing phase, as an example. This is a sort of a sample of what the airport authorities design build process looks like. And they are a quasi-public agency as defined in California. So their selection is almost totally based on qualifications. And then price for them is optional. And I've looked at some of their projects they've done in the past, and this is an example of how they would do, how they would go about doing that procurement. But I believe today most of what they do is on quals, and they work out the rest as part of their negotiation with their design build team. And you can imagine at the airport, they're probably motivated to get things done as soon as possible because whether it's airline, a terminal design or a gate, or parking garages, or getting people moved in and out of the airport, because it all means money to them. Here's another example. This was the first design build projects the state of California did, anyway, building projects. And I worked on these projects in the early 90s. At the time, we had the use of a design build concept was authorized in statutory authority for these two buildings, but we had no definitions of what design build looked like. There was no statute defining how you would do procurement. There was no statute identifying whether price had to play into the selection or not. Because we were replacing buildings in downtown Oakland and downtown San Francisco, and the land was being provided by the city in the case of Oakland, and we were part of the Civic Center in San Francisco, design was a key driver in determining who we would select. In fact, we had design competition on the projects. When we got to a short list, it was a qualifications. We had a budget that we asked them to, what would be the best way for me to describe it, to tell us they thought they could make it. I wouldn't do that today. I would ask for something a little more concrete in their proposal than that. But we negotiated the price, and we literally negotiated the entire contract. The state, up to that point, had only done design bid build, and it had its lump sum construction contract and its typical design contracts. It had no experience at all in design build. I got assigned to figure this out, and myself and our outside counsel and the contractors' attorneys, we sat down and tried to come up. We did come up with a standard agreement for both projects that both projects used. They were tweaked a little bit because we had the team in San Francisco was a joint venture, and the team in Oakland was not. Eric and I, Kissauer and I, actually worked together on the Oakland project. The projects were successful. We actually, it was about a 200, if I remember right, in San Francisco, it was a $245 million project. And believe it or not, we didn't use one penny of our contingency, of the owner's contingency on the project. That probably means that the price we negotiated was too high, but it was nice to return $5 million back to the state at the end of the project. So the last thing I want to talk about today is, I know Eric said this is sort of design build 101, but this is not design build 101 here. This is the Long Beach Courthouse, which is a design build finance operate project. And just to give you some background, and when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor, the state looked at, actually from the governor's office, doing public-private partnerships, mostly because I'm guessing that the state didn't have a lot of extra cash laying around at the time, and it had a lot of infrastructure needs. So the Long Beach Courthouse in LA County was in horrible condition and needed to be replaced. And it got selected to be a public-private partnership. At the time, there was 2 Caltrans projects also selected in the state. It was a 36-month timeline for design and construction once the contract got negotiated, but it included a 35-year O&M responsibility to the team that won the project, in addition to them financing the whole thing. Our budget was $339 million, and it was occupied by the state in 2013. I can say I deal with this project now as the head of facilities. Once a year, we have a square up with the team that's operating the building for us. And it's actually the best maintained building in the state that we have, courthouse. At the end of the term, they turn over a building to us that is where the systems are actually renewed to the condition they should be in. So if an elevator is at its useful life, they have the obligation in the agreement to have that elevator modernized when it comes to us. 11 consortiums actually proposed on the project originally. 5 teams got shortlisted for the interview. 3 were selected for the final competition, which was design, build, finance, and maintain. It was a 6-month competition with multiple meetings. Because of the financing and the whole building operations component of this, it was an extensive contract negotiation with a whole bunch of lawyers and banks and everything else. The Judicial Council had a management role in the project from the design and construction standpoint. We had only provided the design build team our standard guidelines for design and construction and a program for the project. There's some photos of what the Long Beach project looks like today. It's a great building. It also actually has a retail component to it, and there is space in the building that LA County and the local city of Long Beach, I believe, lease from us as well. And here's the lobby, or the front door in the lobby, and another perspective. So at this point, I'd be happy to take questions.
Well, thanks very much, Mike. I forgot to mention earlier that on the sidebar of your screen, there is a place to post questions. And so if anybody's got questions now, we'd be happy to entertain those questions. In the beginning of your presentation, Mike, you talked about project definition. How do you manage the end user expectations when you're going through your project definition process?
It's a really good question. It's a challenge on any project, especially if you're switching to design build and your users and you as the owner are used to controlling the design. You really have to work when you go to design build as you define what's important to you and you let the design build team deal with the rest. If you think about any building you're going to build, you've got the needs of the user, which you can define simply in some sort of program, whether it's in my case number of courtrooms, or how big is the jury assembly space supposed to be, or in an office building, how big should the floor plate be, what's the percentage of fixed offices to open offices. But you don't worry about the structural system as an example, because it's going to be built to code. You don't worry about the design of the mechanical system unless there's types of mechanical systems you don't want to entertain, or if you want air changes in excess of what's in the building code, or if you wanted energy efficiency in excess of what's in Cal Green today, as an example, in California. And then you have to think through what's the interaction between the design build team who's actually implementing the design and the owner. What points will you guys get together to make sure you get the user input? And then also as the owner, depending on how you're administrating the contract, you're going to want to verify at these different points that the design build team is meeting the criteria that you as the owner defined and put into the proposal. If you have no criteria, then you're just going along designing the building with them, and then you're hoping it fits within your GMP. If you've got criteria developed, as I said earlier, you define enough so that you can set a budget. Now your budget is the GMP budget that you're trying to meet, and then as the design builder is designing presenting their design to you, you then check that design against the criteria to make sure that they're complying. It's not like if it's a user and it's for me it's the local court, they'll want to look at the things that are important to them. How's the building organized? What's the relationship between the judge's chambers and the courtroom, or where's the jury deliberation room and the courtroom? They're going to care about that. I'm going to care about, because I'm maintaining the building, the electrical system, the mechanical system, and things like that.
Okay. Question came in. Do you see a benefit in doing design competitions versus the selection of a design build team on qualifications?
So the example I cited was, we're putting a building in downtown Oakland through a joint powers authority with the city. And we're trying to revitalize, quite honestly, what was a blighted area of the city. So the city was a member of our selection panel. So the design competition was important to everybody. Normally, design competitions cost money. And so if you're going to have a design competition, I would always be paying a stipend. Now, on the other side of that is if you're going to do qualifications-based selection and then design a building jointly with somebody, I'm not an architect for everybody's information, but here's something I've sort of determined. Architects are who they are based on the buildings they've designed. So if you're going to be selecting a design build team and you're doing qualifications-based selection, you can look at the architect's resume, the buildings they've designed, and that will tell you what kind of building they're going to design for you. You're not going to change somebody who designs, ultra modern, ultra contemporary buildings, and you're looking for something that's, some sort of classical design. So again, it just depends on what you're trying to do. if you're going to have a design competition, as I said earlier, you need to pay a stipend.
Okay. When you're going through your selection process, as you look at a firm experiencing key people, are there lessons learned for selecting the best team in that analysis?
Sure. So as I've done different projects, I don't know, I've probably been in a dozen design build procurements now in the last 25 years, maybe even more. A lot of times design build teams are they're gonna promise you a certain person, and how are you guaranteed you're gonna get that person? So we are very cautious as an owner when we make qualifications-based selection today, and we want to be assured that if we're going to act on a project, that we get the team, the people that design build team is proposing, because after all, we're selecting them based on those people. We actually did a project when I was advising CDCR where it was so important to us to get the people that we wrote into the contract, one, they could not remove that person from the project without our express approval. And if they did without our approval, we stipulated a financial penalty they would pay. Fortunately, we didn't have to use that, but we wanted the design build team to understand how important those people were to us in making that selection.
Okay, I wanted to let everybody know that you can get DBIA credits for this presentation today as long as you have registered on the site. If you are part of a group and you're looking for design build credits, please send into our executive director, Gloria Moore, the list of people who attended the different sessions that you've been in. This presentation is also available on our DBIA website. At the end of the day, we'll be posting it there, and Mike has been very gracious in allowing us to share his work with us. So we don't have any other questions at this point in time, and I really appreciate the effort that you put into making this thing happen, Mike. This has really been informative, and look forward to seeing you at our next event.
Sure, thanks, Eric, and I apologize for the little PowerPoint presentation screw up at the beginning. No matter how many times we practice, I still did it wrong.
It even happens during presidential debates. What can you say?
There you go.
So, okay. We'll be ending a little bit early today, but thanks very much for everybody that attended. And again, thank Mike Courtney.
Thank you.